Today's video is going to be a little bit different. You might notice this shirt I'm wearing here. It's from Elixir Conf, which was a phenomenal conference that happened in Orlando, Florida this year that I had a great time at. And for whatever reason, they decided to invite me to keynote it. Yes, I, the soy JavaScript dev, keynoting a conference for a different, much better language. If you didn't already know, I have a long history with Elixir, and I do genuinely credit it for a lot of my success. I can't imagine where I would be today without the language. The conference, however, that was so good. I wish I had went many years before. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. And one last really important call out before we get to my talk. Their YouTube channel is awesome too. They have all of the best talks from the event this year. I highly recommend this one in particular, Livebook in the Cloud. This was a joint talk between Chris McCord and another Chris, I can't remember the last name of, talking in depth about this really cool pattern for spinning up Elixir processes on other servers, kind of like Lambda, to do crazy stuff like FFmpeg video generation or AI calls and all this cool stuff. Really awesome to temporarily spin up a GPU cluster. Check that out if you want to see more of the magic of Elixir. One last huge thank you to Elixir Conf for giving me this talk to post on my channel. I cannot imagine where I would be without the Elixir community. Without further ado, no more yapping. Let's hear about how Elixir made me a great developer.
Good to be here, y'all. It means more than I know how to put into words. I know this title by itself probably doesn't feel super real, but Elixir was essential to my success as a developer, and I wanted to take the time to tell the story today. A lot of y'all probably know me from things like my Twitter, full of lots of valuable posts, or my YouTube, full of lots of wonderful soy faces. But you might have seen one specific live stream I did. One of the 2 interviews I've done in the last almost 2 years. My channel started largely doing interviews, but due to a combination of the complexity of getting it set up, making it into good content, and the lack of success I saw from that type of content, as well as the success I was seeing from other types, for the most part, I realized I could better showcase the things I enjoyed by doing videos about them and collaborating with the creators rather than just doing the interview. But I just wanted to talk to Jose so badly, best Rails contributor ever, right? Wanted to take the opportunity and see what I could learn from him and share with my audience, and it went incredibly. It's still one of my best performing interviews ever, and it's my personal favorite. It was just such a great conversation, just the joy and excitement radiates from him, and it radiated to me. Enough about my channel, though. We're going to talk about talks for a second, because talks are weird. I had never given a talk before I started YouTube, and that was both a really strong benefit to my ability to give good talks improv, but also comes at the cost of being in YouTube brain constantly. And after giving more talks over the last year, I've realized something I didn't fully understand initially. Talks are personal. I was so used to YouTube where you're fighting every second to not lose the attention of the viewer, because if you're not compelling enough for a moment, there are 7 more compelling videos on the side right next to yours they could click on at any given time. So I had to trim, focus, condense, and make things as compelling as possible. I know you look at a 2-hour video like, there's no way you did that. Trust me, I did. But talks are different. The reality is there isn't a better video next to me right now. There isn't really an opportunity to leave. I mean, you can. You'll just feel awkward as hell doing it. I know, because I've been in that position before too. Feel free to, honestly, if you need to. No worries, but until you decide I effectively have you here hostage, which means I get to talk about things I don't normally, which means I get to talk about myself a whole bunch. I was not born a 10x dev. If I'm honest, I wasn't even born a 1x dev. When I graduated college, I looked like this. And yeah, my college journey was fascinating. I'm going to quickly go over the tech I used while in college. And after writing this slide, I realized I missed a bunch, and I'll try to fill it in as I go. I started coding because I wanted to play Minecraft with my friends. My friends were assholes and kept breaking my stuff. So I had to learn how to host servers, add plugins, got really good at Git and SSH in order to keep my servers running on remote servers, and was able to get okay at Java. The only reason I passed my APCS exam was because of Minecraft. I was also pretty nerdy about Android. I was starting to get involved with things like CyanogenMod and the custom ROMing scene because Apple sucks and this is terrible. Then I went to college and I got a MacBook because I needed a computer that actually worked. And this was 2013, so I needed a battery. Liked it quite a bit. iOS 7 came out, got an iPhone. Then I realized Android sucks and became an iOS dev for a bit. But then a really cool device came out called the Pebble. Who remembers the Pebble? Let's see a show of hands. I'm sad at how few that is. The Pebble was the original smartwatch. You could program it yourself, which was really cool. The software it came with was great, but the ability to design my own thing that I would literally wear as a bit of a fashion nerd was so cool. So I got really into that for a bit. Building an app or a watch face with Pebble required two different languages, C and JavaScript. One was used for managing assets in memory and how the application was actually instantiated. The other was for managing the UI and how it was laid out. Not the ones you think. You did all the memory and asset management in the JavaScript because that ran on the mobile app, and then you did all of the UI on the C side. So my first big UI project was in C with the backend in JavaScript. There was also a tangent in here about C++ that I didn't add in. I spared you the details of my brutal C++ data structures class, which was my first programming class in college. It was the weed out class, trying to make sure if you're not really into computer science and programming that you won't stick with the major. Survived it, barely, but had negative feelings about memory management at that point. Then the Apple Watch came out, and I gave that an honest go, but it was quite limited, to say the least. I never actually got anything to ship on Apple Watch. And what I noticed as I was going through all of these stages is my commitment to any given of these things was almost going down as I went further. Pebble was a nice boost where I tried a bit harder, but other than that, I was spending less time with the solutions I was working with and feeling less invested in them overall. But then I got an internship at Amazon, which meant that I was working in Amazon's primary language, Ruby. For those who know, Java is the main language at Amazon, but Ruby was what my specific team was using, which is one of the many reasons why that team never shipped. Lots coming up about that. Don't worry, we'll be going back to Ruby. Then we have Chrome extensions. When I was doing this internship at Amazon, Windows 10 came out. I don't remember what year the Amazon internship was. I just looked up when Windows 10 came out when I needed to find it. I remember this because Windows 10 introduced Cortana. And with Cortana came the ability to search the web from Windows directly, as long as the web means Bing to you, which to most people, the web does not mean Bing. So I made a quick Chrome extension with my roommate and two of my friends I made during the internship, where they did most of the code. I just kind of orchestrated it, conceptualized it, branded it, and released it. But I got to work with a really high-functioning team with a short deadline and shipped a Chrome extension that got millions of installs as a college student. And that was the first time I had a taste of building something people wanted and getting it out there. It was a really impactful moment for me, which is why I immediately took the things I learned, threw them away, and started writing things in Python. Yeah, this was the almost, I don't even have a good word for it. It was just utter chaos I was putting myself through, switching between languages constantly and not really finding a home for myself. But the two I had really committed myself to were Ruby and Python. Ruby was, as I mentioned, for that internship at Amazon, and I'll be honest, I quite liked Ruby. Put your hand up if you liked the syntax of Ruby when you first tried it out. That's about twice as many people as know what Pebble was. Depressing. But yes, the syntax for Ruby, especially when you compared it to almost any other language at the time, was oh, it can actually look like English. And that was really impactful for me. What was also impactful was the fact that my manager, mentor, whatever you want to call him, for my internship wasn't there for the first 2 months of my 3-month internship. So I was just expected to figure things out myself, which didn't work out great. The other thing I learned is that Ruby's performance sucks, and Amazon didn't want us to ship it because it wasn't Java. Those two things led to us researching JRuby. And by us, I mean me, because I was the intern, and the project that they had assigned me was literally impossible, so they gave me this instead. What if we just took all of multiple teams' Ruby code and just made it Java too? Who knows what JRuby is? Who's heard of JRuby before? Way more people than I would have expected. JRuby was a very interesting thing to discover, and it had a huge impact on me. The performance of JRuby compared to vanilla Ruby was nuts. It was effectively a 2x win for a bunch of different use cases. Truffle Ruby did not exist at the time, also built on top of Graal, very similar. But what I learned from this was important. There's two key things. The first is that you can make a good language on top of a bad language, to put it frank. it was so cool to see something like Ruby with syntax I didn't hate on top of something that was actually performant and scalable, like JavaScript, or like Java and the Graal VM. I did know that there were other languages built on top of things, like obviously C compiles to assembly, stuff like that. But the experiences I had had with really high-level languages compiling to another high-level language, like with Scala, was not great. Okay, brief tangent on that one. I had a professor in college for programming languages who made his own actor-based Java language called Salsa. The documentation consisted of a single 200-page PDF that could not be command-F'd. And we had to do our final project in it. Not optional, had to. I was on a team working on it with 2 other people. They all wrote the salsa code that, as far as they understood, worked, but it wasn't working. I was the only one on the team who had ever written Java, so I was debugging the output Java code from salsa because that was easier to do than try and figure out the horrifying documentation. That professor was no longer allowed to teach programming languages after my feedback. The other thing I learned from this was that performance was not a solved problem. Obviously, that's the case. We all know performance is a battle we're fighting every day. But remember, I'd only been doing this for like 3 years. I was still in college. I never had a real programming job. And to me, programming languages were these things that just kind of existed. Maybe new features were added, maybe new ideas were explored. But the programming language existed. It had its characteristics. And if you wanted different ones, you went and looked at a different language that already existed. But with this, I was seeing innovation and changes for the first time, that you could actually take something as it was and improve the performance of it for all of the users. And that stuck with me. And I tried to let Ruby stick with me as a whole. I had done a lot of time in WordPress. I honestly probably should have included that in the language slide because it's its own language at this point. And I had a really bad time with WordPress. I had done my uncle's site in it somewhat recently, forgotten to update the WordPress version for a few too many months, and it got pwned. And I was done. I was tired of dealing with WordPress and all the madness there. So I decided to give this language I was enjoying a shot. And for the first time, I know I just spent the summer in Ruby, I touched Rails for the first time the next semester in college and tried building a blog in it. And as you can see, I stayed really committed to that. I gave up in a day. I did not like Rails. I tried. Okay, I didn't try that hard, I'll be honest, but Rails did not work for me. At the same time, I needed money, and I needed more things to do at school. I got really close with one of my professors who was both the database and systems professor, as well as a nerd about data, ML, and all sorts of research stuff. And she was working with a whole of the other professors that needed things for their crazy research tasks, and brought me in for credits during the semester, but also paid over the summer to work on an app for identifying different rock types. They would take pictures of rocks and random geological spaces from above and use mapping to draw out what types of rocks and formations existed in different areas. And one of the professors really liked using his iPad for this, and none of the tools worked well. So I was tasked to try and figure that out. Needed to be a web service with a website, and did everything that way. I had just had my rough experience with Rails, and since these were the data people, there was a language that they preferred: Python. A lot of the people in my life really liked Python. It was clearly a choice from the smart people that I looked up to at the time. And I also wanted to like Python, just from everything I had heard from them, from the cool things I saw people building with it. But I did not. Raise your hand if you think virtual environment, VNV, was a good idea. Good. Not one hand. Correct answer. It was pain, especially after the experience I had had with Ruby. It felt like everything Python was different in, it was wrong. Every single thing Python did differently from my experience with other language, it was doing incorrectly and painfully and slower and bad. I don't know why we let this language take over ML. But it did get some good points for me. The big thing was the ecosystem there. 2 packages in particular, Django and Flask. I liked one of these. Django just felt too much like the things I didn't enjoy in Rails, and Flask felt much more approachable. The big thing for me is that Flask had a much more minimal starting point, and you added what you wanted yourself. Django was, here's everything you ever need, the batteries included mindset, and Flask was, here's how simple it is to get started, add things as you need them. And the code was hilariously simple. So simple that somebody like me who has no idea what they're doing would name their routes the different types of HTTP requests. Like they're literally named post and delete for the different file or fields. It's post CSV, post mappings, and delete map. I would learn the right ways eventually. But the fact that I could just put a declaration on top like that and write some code and it would just do the thing was magical. I didn't entirely hate this, which was crazy because I had had so many bad experiences with everything web that I was at the point I just didn't think the web was for me. And I'd spend my whole life doing services, little like terminal applications and things like that. But then something important happened. I got a job. A little place called Twitch TV. Okay, I'm not that old. The logo looked like this when I joined. Speaking of old, though, who knows who this is? Most hands so far. Keep your hands up. And keep your hand up if you're over the age of 35. Lost about a third of the hands. I can still call you guys old because I'm not 30 yet, but soon I'll be with you. Now put your hand up again if you remember, or if you heard of Bob Ross for the first time through the Twitch marathon. Yeah, I'm a kid, okay? The Bob Ross marathon was a magic moment for Twitch. Before then, Twitch was strictly a gaming-only site. In fact, some of the biggest Twitch streamers, one of them, why can't I remember his name? I don't want to sit too long trying to remember that. Devin Nash. He was a league player, and when he won a game, he would dance between rounds, and his partner manager hit him up and said, hey, you have to stop dancing, or we have to ban you, because dancing is not gaming, and we're a gaming site. Which is hilarious, because like programming on Twitch is a huge thing now, art on Twitch is a huge thing now, but at the time, 2015, 2016 especially, non-gaming content was a bannable offense on Twitch. And the Bob Ross Marathon was the first attempt to branch out and do something that wasn't gaming, and it blew up. The amount of articles, positive press coverage, raw viewership on the event was nuts. From a one-off employee at Twitch, it hit up his friends that worked for the company that owned Bob Ross's rights, did this tiny little contract, put the stream up, and it blew up. So much so that Twitch made a huge change. They decided to make this marathon permanent. I'm sure weed was definitely involved in the decision-making process. But that meant that Twitch was no longer a gaming site, fundamentally, which is a huge thing for me because I didn't want to work in gaming. I liked video games. They were fun for me, but it just wasn't the thing I wanted to dedicate my life to. But I also didn't want to work at Amazon. Twitch got bought by Amazon, though, which made that a little complex. I also bombed the interview. The interview was really rough. I had a couple failures going into interviews. The first is that my penmanship is embarrassing, is putting it lightly. I'm ambidextrous in the sense that both of my hands are equally bad when it comes to penmanship. And I almost got held back, I think it was 5th grade, because I was so bad at cursive. So I'm genuinely insecure when I have to go up and draw on a whiteboard. It wasn't until Excalidraw came out that I discovered a love of whiteboarding and diagramming, because up until that point, it was just an insecurity of mine. So when I was told to go up to a whiteboard during an interview, immediate nerves, not going to perform well. I also was terrible at LeetCode, because I didn't enjoy those types of programming problems. That data structures class I mentioned earlier was like super heavy LeetCode type problems that teach you complex data structures in C++. I didn't know what a data structure was, and I had never used C++ before, so I was turned off from those things at a fundamental level, and I was still using C++ for these interviews because it was the thing I was used to for it, which did not go great for me. It went so poorly that they sent in a front-end expert to see if maybe I had some secret front-end skills after the Chrome extension, and he was the one who almost failed me from the interview entirely. But thanks to my music taste and my exec's love of my music taste, specifically we both hated the same Daft Punk album and loved the same Daft Punk albums, which was huge for me, they decided to give me a shot. The one last great thing Daft Punk did for me was release Random Access Memories in the atrocious state they did, because it got me this job. Well, it got me a 3-month contract to hire, because they still weren't confident in my abilities at all. But that was enough to move to SF, get started, fail the first 3 months, work even harder the next 3 months, and get a full-time offer. I was in. But what was I in? Twitch was in an interesting place in 2017, and I think this is important context to have. Non-gaming no longer gets you banned, which is a huge change. The stack was Ruby on Rails with Ember.js, one of the last big Ember houses. I think it's mostly just LinkedIn now. Apparently there's an Ember renaissance going on, according to the Ember people. I haven't heard outside of that at all. They had just been acquired by Amazon, which meant I got a really generous sign-on bonus with a lot of Amazon stock that did really well. And they were hiring like mad, just going crazy with the hiring at the moment. It was a good time to be there because you got to watch teams grow immensely. Like at one point I joined a team with 2 people on it and helped hire it up to about 40. That's when I got good at doing interviews on the other side. Streaming was done entirely through third-party software, which is really interesting. You'd think a site like Twitch would own the tools and technologies you used to do the streams. They didn't at all. Twitch internally had no way to stream. You had to use OBS, the open source streaming solution, or XSplit, the for money streaming solution that was like OBS but worse. At the time it was still better, but that's since changed. Anybody using XSplit isn't serious anymore. At this point, I think it's around 97% of all streamers use OBS, and of the top 100 streamers, it's basically all 100 are using OBS now. Great piece of software, really tough to learn though, which we'll get to in a minute, because Twitch was investing in new content verticals. They realized that the things that worked on Twitch had a limited reach, and they wanted to expand past that. They wanted to expand outside of gaming, and they wanted to make Twitch more accessible, which is why they spent far too much money building streaming apps into the new Xbox and PlayStation, the One and PS4 that had shipped that year. Twitch had hired a bunch of engineers and spent millions of dollars in order to get those apps built in. And what they ended up with was a more expensive infra bill and a bunch of single viewer streams that never amounted to anything because the quality of streamer and stream you get from a built-in console app is garbage. And that was a mistake. While this was going on, though, the team that I was joining, the creative team, was investigating how could we get more artists to work on Twitch. And OBS was a huge blocker. Who has tried to use OBS before? That is more people than Pebble still. That's disappointing. Who struggled to set up OBS when they tried? Almost the same number of people, about 2/3 as many. Yeah, it was bad. So my first task was to try and figure out how to make streaming more accessible to people by building an Electron app for streaming. But then the console app shipped, failed outright, and we scrapped that, both because of those failing, but also because of a slight problem we had. The Bob Ross Marathon needed to run somehow, and it looked like this. There was a specific room that only 3 employees were allowed, and I had to have one of them let me in when there was things to do. And it's like, we were small, but we weren't that small. Having a room with only 3 people allowed was suspicious. The reason was this laptop that ran the marathons. And it was not reliable. This was not a good way to run marathon content, especially when the laptop would have weird issues on Sunday morning at 3 a.m. and somebody had to run to the office to fix it. So it was time to write a real transcoding and streaming service. And as we all know, when you want to write a real transcoding and streaming service, you do it in Ruby. We threw that away relatively quickly because it did not work at all. And now, about halfway through this presentation, we finally get to the point, a language that I think most of us know about, Elixir. I fell in love. I fell in love with Elixir incredibly quickly. There's a couple reasons for that. I'm going to break down the 3 important impacts that Elixir had on me and try and break this whole thing down into 3 parts, because otherwise it's utter chaos. I tried my hardest to organize this. I think I did an okay job. Give me feedback after if I didn't. The first thing I want to talk about is how Elixir hooked me. Then I want to talk down what it enabled for me and my team, and then, in the end, how it leveled me up specifically. The first thing was the syntax. Elixir met me where I was. I knew Ruby really well. It was the one language I actually enjoyed writing. I didn't enjoy shipping it or using it or the teams I worked on with it or any of the projects I built with it. But Ruby itself was actually kind of pleasant to write and read and review. Not that I ever got to review anybody else's code, but it's at least a nice looking language. And if you look at the syntax and you compare it to something like Elixir, it's quite similar. The inspiration is pretty clear. Almost like the person who made Elixir was really deep in the Ruby community and contributed to Rails and did a bunch of stuff over there. Who would have thought? The other thing was packages. Remember, I was in Ruby for a bit where we had gems, which were fine, but there were some really good gems like Rubocop. And then I went to Python where everything was a garbage dumpster fire. And this was like peak of Python 3 trying to get adopted, so it was even worse when I was getting in. Then there was the documentation side of the packages. The fact that every package had docs built in and you could just go to a web page and read about it was unbelievable for somebody going in heads first. For the first time also putting all of my time into this one thing, because I wasn't a student. It's not like I had classes, I had friend obligations. I had no friends, I just moved to SF. So I was spending all of my time working on these things. And I felt like there was always an answer to the thing I was doing, and I never lost focus. My ADHD was very happy with my choice of language. There was always something to look into, to do, to explore, to solve, to share with my team, and to dive into. Even things like umbrella projects as a concept and the addiction to microservices we had at Twitch, and they still probably have at Twitch. All of those things made me feel really capable and productive, and I felt really fast in under a week. My onboarding was unbelievable, especially coming as a burnt-out Ruby dev that had just had the terrible experience with Python. I only caused one production outage in my first month, and it's because I used a lowercase p instead of an uppercase one for the Power Rangers marathon. Please add type safety. Anyways, we need to talk about what Elixir enabled for my team next. It ended up being a really useful solution for one reason in particular: the concurrency distribution and all the power around that. In fact, the thing that we did was very unique at the time, but has since become the go-to example for a lot of Elixir demos. FFmpeg. My entire life at Twitch for my first year was writing complex FFmpeg wrappers with crazy orchestration in Elixir, and I learned so much so fast. I know Elixir, I know FFmpeg far too well, and I've continued to use it since, and Elixir as effectively a DIY interface on top of it was really powerful. It was so powerful that my manager, who introduced me to Elixir, became an incredibly helpful mentor and essential to my career, John Waba, actually presented a lot of the work that we were doing at Elixir Conf 7 years ago. It's crazy to be on this stage 7 years later, and Waba, if you're watching this, thank you. It's hard to put into words how much you impacted my career. It was unbelievable for me to see somebody who I worked with, who had taught me so much, showcasing work that we had done together in front of an audience like this. And I'd never even been to a conference before. It was so impactful for me. The way the infra worked was super cool. We had a bunch of boxes spun up on AWS. I'll never forget the words Baba told me when we started spinning things up. It was, so we just got acquired by Amazon. It's important that we think about our costs as we make choices about our infrastructure. So whenever you're deploying something, go take a look at one of the AWS pricing calculators, see how expensive the box is. But remember, we're owned by Amazon, so you have to multiply that by a number for us to be more reasonable what the costs are. Multiply that number by 0 and then think of the cost that way. Classic Wabism. But that meant that we were running a lot more servers than we needed. We were running a C48XL per stream and had a whole bunch of extra ones just doing transcoding in the background. It was great. I had a personal one just as my dev box. It was super fun, and being able to synchronize all these things, take advantage of the incredible process management in Elixir was so, so cool. It was the ability to just take the FFmpeg process, dump the output to standard out, grab that in grab that, I can't see the name, I forgot, what was it called? Porcelain, yeah. God, Porcelain was magical at the time. Being able to just take standard out and pipe it to other places lazily, so cool. So what we would do is we would spin up like 3 different concurrent processes that were taking a video via FFmpeg from S3 and dumping those into a byte stream that fit the format that Twitch expected. And then we just had these 3 processes running at any given time until one was exhausted. Then I could start up the next one. But it would fill that with a byte stream that I could then lazily consume via another FFmpeg process that was streaming it out to Twitch. So I was encoding as fast as possible on those however many concurrent processes, parallel processes. We'll talk about concurrency and parallelism in a minute, don't worry. And then lazily pull those out real time to Twitch, which is really cool, being able to do things as efficiently as possible on one side and then with the weird restriction of real time on the other side, all with code that was totally readable to a junior developer like myself. It was so readable that I was able to ship a really cool project, Clips TV, myself in under a week. This project would scrape the top clips on Twitch, which were little 30-second to minute-long moments that had happened on streams. It would look at the top ones. It would grab them via YouTube DL, output those the same way to my stream process, and keep a running loop of the top 100 clips live on Twitch with a fancy little animation that would appear in the corner with, and I did way too much animation stuff with FFmpeg. Waste of time, really fun opportunity, learned a lot. What was crazy here is not that I shipped YouTube DL in production at Twitch, not that there was no better way for us to download clips as employees at Twitch. It was that a junior dev could make a new service that the company had been talking about for a while at that point in literally a week as a quick demo of non-gaming stuff on Twitch. And it went really poorly. This actually introduced me to the safety team because when we decided to take it down, they hit me up because the content that was the top clips on Twitch was so often terms of service violations that they had parked a safety employee, like a moderator, on the stream watching for TOS violations to go get them taken down. And they'd ask me if I could keep the stream up privately just for them. Great tool. I've hinted a little bit on how Elixir and Beam and the concurrency and parallelism stuff was super powerful for us, but I want to talk about it in the context of how it helped me level up. It helped so much. First, though, we need to talk about FP. All of the languages that I'd used up until this point were OOP, but very much OOP in quotes. They had classes, but they all had disagreements on what a class was, and none of them were correct or incorrect. They were all just bad. And I'd never actually experienced functional programming before. I don't want this to just be another FP talk, because it's not the biggest thing for me with Elixir, but man, it was really powerful to have a well-designed functional programming language with syntax that wasn't Haskell early in my career. And I think I got to be part of this new wave of functional programming like advocates and one of the younger FP people, period, because Elixir let me consume it in a way that met where I was syntactically. And that was huge for me. I, to this day, hate OO, and it's that dude's fault for it. So blame him. I'm very thankful. But he also taught me true concurrency and parallelism and the difference between the two. None of these things are things that I shouldn't have known at that point. Like, I probably should have understood that. But I learned programming the way most people do in college, which I didn't understand anything about it. And the model for concurrency and parallelism in, to be fair, not in Elixir itself, but in everyone's favorite Erlang, was really powerful. And the ability to use and abuse that in Elixir was so cool. Just like the moment when Spawn clicked and I realized I could just make another process somewhere else was so, so powerful. And even as a junior dev, I was able to make things that scaled in ways that were unbelievable to other people at the company. Remember, most of Twitch was still Rails devs and Ruby devs. So when I talked to them about what we were doing with this service, they didn't understand it. I got to feel powerful for the first time. Like, I know things they don't. And I'm not going to tell them why or how. It was incredible. And then another important thing happened. My manager, Waba, started sending me his favorite random things from the Elixir community. One of those talks melted my brain. This is the Gen Stage talk. And despite the fact that it was filmed on a terrible projector screen with a reflection on it that makes it basically impossible to read half the code, I watched this probably 10 times, 8 of which were just trying to translate the code off the slides, but the other 2 were trying to understand it. And it was incredible. It was so powerful to see these concepts, things that we were inventing ourselves on the team, being streamlined in the language so that we could make it almost felt like the language was being designed around our weird use case, which now in 2024, seeing 2 of the 3 keynotes mentioning FFmpeg, it was kind of built around our use case. I was watching the language as it improved, and that was so cool to have happen. I got to watch when the formatter was added, the one great thing from Go. I got to watch when a lot of the things around live view started to happen too. Who's heard of drab? Show your hand if you've heard of drab before. I know an Elixir thing no one else does. That's really cool. Drab is the precursor to live view. I know that because I shipped this in production in 2017. And when I was saying previously that I was the first production live view user, I wasn't. I was the first production user of drab, which was a lot of the inspiration and direction for live view. I'm sure Chris will correct me if I'm wrong here, but according to both Waba and ChatGPT, that is the case. It was one of the first remote-controlled frameworks where the server tells the client not just what it looks like initially, but what to change. And that was so, so cool because I hated JavaScript. I hated web development. All my experience was in WordPress or in Flask. And as soon as JavaScript was introduced, it took it took the problem that you're trying to solve with JavaScript and added 15 more problems while not solving that first one. It was really, really rough. And just looking at this code was magical to see myself binding variables. And then they just change. Like the width of this element changes when the server changes that value without any additional work being done. It's magic. And it was so cool to see this as it was happening and then see live view, see all of the development in these spaces, because I got to feel like I was watching a language improve for the first time. To go back to the earlier point of when I was in Ruby, seeing that we could solve problems with these languages and there was an evolution to happen still, I was watching that happen with Elixir. And I felt like I was being rewarded for going deeper and deeper into the community, into the ecosystem, into the language itself. And that community was so exciting. So exciting that I went to my first ever tech event, the Erlangen Elixir meetup in San Francisco. It was Pinterest or what was the other site it might have been? It was one of the ones that begins with a P. I can't remember which specifically. Waba told me what it was, and I took the screenshot, forgot to put where it was in the screenshot because of who I am as a person. But all of this was too good to last. I was having an incredible time. The Elixir community was fundamentally changing the trajectory of my career. But then a reorg happened. And that creative team I was on, we'd already been rebranded as premium content because the marathons were going so well. But then we outsourced that because having an internal infrastructure team just running these video streams on these giant expensive info boxes was not the most efficient way to do anything. So I outsourced my own job to a company called Whirl, if I recall. That was a television broadcast solutions company that would do the annoying parts of working with the TV asset owners. And then I taught them how to use the Twitch API and what types of formats were accepted by Twitch. And they were able to use their existing solution for queuing, scheduling content, introducing ads and stuff like that to stream to Twitch for us. And it was a lot cheaper than 3 expensive engineers. So I had to change teams. Thankfully, at the same time, Twitch was realizing that the Ruby on Rails approach with our friend, how am I already forgetting Ember's name? Ember. That Rails and Ember were not the right choice for the website anymore. So with this new team, I got to try some new exciting stuff. Go. I hated Go. I was a mess. At the same time, my manager realized he didn't like being a manager. He missed just being an engineer, so he switched back to an IC role. My new manager was mostly a front-end guy. And he saw how miserable I was writing Go. I was not getting anything done. I felt like I was spending weeks to rewrite things I could have done in minutes before. It was constant pain. And I just wasn't motivated anymore. I wasn't really shipping for weeks at a time. And he gave me the hard talk of, you're not performing. This might be the end of your career if you don't get your shit together. I'm not pipping you yet, but there is one coming up if you don't fundamentally change things. And I know you're not going to like what I'm about to say. And I know you really don't like the web. But there's this new thing called React. And we're starting to explore it for Twitch. You might want to take a look. I even heard there might be some functional programming stuff going on in the near future with it. So I begrudgingly gave it a shot. At the time, I knew that there was some work going on with it because Twitch had just acquired a company called Curse. And Curse brought us the curse of React for our entire application. When we told them that they had to work on our web app and embed it in their Electron app, they took one look at the code base and said, we don't even know how to add a button to this. What do you mean we're going to embed this? And before we could say, you have to learn it, they had rewritten a third of the site in React, and it was way faster, way nicer to work in, and they started this guerrilla campaign to trick people into using React. I like the new site more than I like the language and the framework, but I had so much enjoyment seeing how that team brute force their way to success and brute force a takeover of the way we built at Twitch that I gave it an honest shot. But then something really important happened. My manager was right. React did go the functional programming direction. When they introduced hooks, my mind was blown. I had just a few weeks before had the click moment where I understood class components and state, and now React was going all in on functional programming. There's an important thing that this meant. Twitch Web was now accidentally a giant functional programming code base if they wanted to follow best practices. And I was the only person working in that code base that actually understood functional programming. So as a junior engineer, I got to take a lot of charge over that code base. I got to drive hook adoption. I got to change a lot of the way we architected things. I got to do lots of spec reviews and shift the places that we were going with that code base. It was incredible. And the energy I felt there and the excitement and all of the things in that community, it was nowhere near as fast and real as what I had experienced in the Elixir world, but what I had taken from there, I could bring to the React world and to the code bases at Twitch. My excitement exploring new things as they come out. My excitement advocating for these different patterns and the power of simplicity and doing things the way that is the most maintainable rather than the most perfect match for your template that doesn't necessarily fit the problem. The idea of simplicity at scale, I was addicted to it. And I got to really drive that through all of Twitch because of the lessons Elixir taught me in that year stint I had with it. I have a lot of other tangents I could go on. One specific point I want to make is how powerful it was for me to see my own manager giving a talk on YouTube. I don't know if I would have become a YouTuber if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for seeing the way that we could have these involvements in the community, that the things I was doing weren't just relevant and exciting to our little group, but could go much further. And then things like the talks from our great friend Jose, showing me how powerful creators of these tools could be in communicating not just what they built, but the mindset behind what they built. And I got so interested in that. My addiction to understanding how people built things and why they made the choices they made was a huge part of why I became successful as a creator, influencer, lead engineer, CEO, and investor, and all these other things. Understanding the why was really powerful for me. And I think most engineers either never discover that or it's much later in their careers. And I don't think I would be where I am today. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be on this stage if it wasn't for Elixir getting me excited about those things so early in my career. I could do a whole separate tangent about server-driven UI and how much it taught me those patterns and why I became the go-to guy for server components in the React world as a result of that too. I'll spare that for my YouTube channel though. The last thing I want to say, this is a really important lesson for me, is don't settle. The status quo is just that. It's the way things are. But you can actually change it. And Elixir showed me what it looks like to do that. And I like to think at this point in my career I've made a disproportionate amount of change for the amount of years I have in the career in the space. And I thank Elixir deeply for showing me what that could be and what that looks like. Thank you all so much for having a TypeScript dev give a keynote at this event. I hope you understand how much y'all mean to me and how much this language actually changed my life. Thank you all.